Hello, world. Welcome to another interview in the In Response Interviews with Intriguing Internalizers series. My name is Mia Park, and I am so excited to continue this interview series with very cool people like our special guest today. This interview series is my internal response to the outside world pressures. It is October 20th, 2020, 10/20/2020. And we could keep exponentially expanding on the numbers, and it might be at the level of what's going on. COVID-19 pandemic, still civil unrest and the struggle for racial justice. We have a crazy election coming on here in America. The climate is changing because of us little human beings on it doing dumb things. There's a lot of stuff going on. But to bring us down to different levels of reality and investigate what more there is, and there's so much more in this world. Our guest today is Chanti Tacoronte-Perez. Yay!
Hey.
Hey. What'd you say, sorry?
Hey again.
Hey again, I know, hey. So Chanti and I know each other through the yoga world. We met maybe 10 years, probably 10 years or more, longer than 10 years ago, doing yoga trainings. And we've been to India together. We've been all over the United States together. I think we were in Mexico together too, maybe. But we were definitely all over the States studying yoga. And right now, she's a woman of the world, like France, Cuba, Colombia, Hawaii, Miami. Did I miss a place? And so right now she is in Minneapolis.
I am.
So you are. So welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So one other thing I'll say about Chanti is that and it's Chanti or Chanti, but I always know her as Chanti. But Chanti is like a very learned person, not only in yogic study and arts, but also fine arts, an artist in her own, but also a trained yantra artist, which is a very strong spiritual practice as well. And she's got her master's degree, and she's currently working on her PhD, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. So welcome. Is there anything else you want people to know about you, Chanti?
Well, I will say I now have 2 masters just because it's important to acknowledge all that time.
And so much work. Good for you.
2 now. Yeah. And no, that's it. That's good. You did great.
2 masters are good for you. Did you get those at the same time or one after the other?
No. So the first one I did was in the humanities at the same school. And then it was like, and you remember that, we were on the phone like weekly during that time. And I felt like I wanted more. There was definitely something about that way of learning that has been really push-pull, a challenge for me, not the way that I usually learn and study. And so that really pushed a whole bunch of stuff forward. So I decided to go back. There was not a PhD, and why I decided to do that was basically because you can have your own ideas. You don't have to have what I refer to as the white male sandwich. So the white male sandwich is basically, in a lot of academic writing, at least how I have found it to be, it's you got to have one white guy's information on this side, your ideas in the middle, and then somebody else buffering it at the back. So the PhD was basically like, oh, here you can formally introduce your own ideas. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Vision or image for me. And so I'm there now. I didn't know if I was going to ever make it through, but I had to take a test and all kinds of stuff. And now I actually I'm in like the writing process currently, which is amazing.
What's your dissertation on? Can you share?
Yeah, this is exciting. I don't think I've told many people, but it's at the very birthing stages. But it is looking at the role of imagination, and how it is actually marginalized and hidden and forgotten. So all those things that the imagination allows us to move forward, and really indigenous wisdom, any wisdom that comes from dreams and different kinds of reality that are not quote unquote scientifically proven. I'm making a space and a voice for that to be acknowledged, heard, and processed in a nonlinear, hopefully just writing type of way. So yeah, the role of imagination in the marginalized and liminal and forgotten wisdoms. ...
That is so fantastic and so needed, because like, and we'll talk about the other two questions I asked. This next one is a segue about what your outside world is like and how you're internally responding. Because I think we already covered that almost. The outside world is so crazy, but it sounds like your dissertation is a beautiful way not only for you to internally respond, but show how others have or do or could. But I'll let you take over from here. So share with us what your outside world looks like and then how you're internally responding, please.
Yeah, so my outside world, so I'm in Minneapolis, and there's been, well, right now it's the actual temperature and the shift to season is really, it's definitely changing. Like, it's snowing currently outside. And we were talking earlier, and I haven't gotten used to this. So that's really, it's cold. And beyond that, it also,
child of the sun,
child of the sun, child of the island. And even beyond that, it feels really cold in a sense that I haven't necessarily been out doing a lot of things because of, the obvious. But in response to, we have to talk about, the murder of George Floyd that happened literally 10 blocks from where I live now. And at first, I didn't have a lot of response. I'm not like that kind of quick to act. And there was no way that I had ever processed anything like that my whole nervous system was really affected by it. And so going back to this idea of like the marginalized voice, even of what it feels like to be in a space where there's fires, there's uprising, there's all kinds of stuff stirring. Not that it hasn't been stirred before, but it came to like a peak. And the symbolic nature of that internal struggle that's been happening, in this state for a long time, more than I could talk about because I'm not from here. But it came out, and it was an actual, and it was an image. It was fire. It was people upset. It was that which gets kind of suppressed, released, and expressed. And, we were looking at I haven't seen, I don't think ever in my life did I watch so much news than those couple of days and then afterwards. But to watch the image unfold of rage being expressed was devastating, and it was almost like an exhale. Because I feel like that we don't have in this Western culture, we don't have rituals and ways to actually express what needs to be expressed sometimes without saying like, oh, you're being too loud, you're being a loud Latin lady, or, all these things that, get, and Minnesota is a really nice place. So you have this idea of Minnesota nice. So nothing gets, nothing gets said. I didn't know what that was. I'm from a culture that is very in your face, and we say it like it is. We talk about our passion, and it's honest. And coming to a place where I had to understand what Minnesota nice was. Like, we're going to give you one face and then talk differently. So it was interesting to see that symbolic kind of image unfolds in the space and around the country, truly around the country. And so my internal response to that, because I couldn't do anything else, was to actually write about it. I was in the middle of writing. It was like the end time of our, I had to write a paper, like at the end of your semester, you have to write all these papers. And I wrote to the teacher, and I'm like, we were studying alchemy, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write a paper on the murder of George Floyd and the alchemical process of what's happening. And he, and this is why the language of the symbolic language of the marginalized actually needs to be voiced. He said, oh, don't you think you're a little too close to that idea? In a way, it reminds me of like, you know, you have to have some distance to be able to see what really is happening. And I was like, I can't write about anything else, to be honest. There's nothing else that I can actually sit down and formulate other than seeing the images, you know, even the colors that were happening, you know, the red of the fire, and then in the funeral it was all white, and it was really helpful for me to actually get that out. And then I got the feedback, of course, was like, well, you didn't explain this and this and this. And I'm like, oh, you missed the whole point. So I'm really hoping that I get to write and create, write and illustrate, write and make, write and dance, something that will actually change the face of academia at some point, where it's not all about the proven glyph written word, but that languages like drawing and movement and even protest as a symbolic language can have a presence in that space.
That sounds awesome. That sounds like right what your PhD is all about. I agree with you. Talking about, like, you know, I went to a great book school. That's where my undergraduate degree is from. We talked about dead white European males. That's the canon. That's the Western canon. And I always see things like, we needed those dead white European men to establish this country that we're in and that we are a part of, and that I'm grateful for in many ways. However, that paradigm has to shift. We don't need that same, like the sandwiching you're talking about. It has to change because it's just not relevant anymore. And all it's doing is like suppressing this growth. So do you want to talk more about your internal response, or we can talk more about the work you're talking about, how imagination and the spaces that occupies? Especially, I love how you're talking about different forms of language in that way too.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically my internal space in response to that has been a lot of more connection to my dream space, more connection to actually bringing that language out in the form of like movement or real simple. I mean, I've been teaching a lot on Zoom, so I've been trying to find how we can, you know, collaborate and connect in a world that we can't necessarily touch, but things can definitely, you know, touch our hearts and our souls in a different way. So I feel imagination is almost at like the heartbeat of that, and even of us moving, you know, further into whatever the world is gonna look like. I mean, we can't go in the opposite direction.
No, things are different for forever.
Yeah.
You know what Heraclitus says, talk about dead white European male, but he did say you can't step in the same river twice in the same place. And he's right. Sometimes they're right.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people who really, really want to, because that's all that they know.
They're so afraid of the power, losing power. Power is from in here, not what you can control, right?
Yeah, but also that idea, that canon, it keeps us. I mean, history is important. We have to look back, but we can't just turn our face and look that way and not realize that there's this whole other world that can possibly happen and come forward. And I feel that, you know, creativity in all forms is important. It's an important step for us to move in, not necessarily in the opposite direction, but like straddling both, so that there's like a bridge where we can move in some other place, and whatever that looks like, without like lugging along, you know, that heavy like suitcase of like the past.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's beautiful. So, how would you recommend someone to become an imagining person? Like, I feel like some people don't know how to imagine.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that. Yes, it's interesting because part of my research is also looking at how fearful the imagination can be, and how people are actually taught not to go there because it can't be proven, right? It's not in the scientific, canonized patriarchal structure. It's not there. Although when you really, really look at it and you look back at science, they were in love with what they were doing. And that got somehow titrated out. The sacrament of creativity that goes into science got, as things do, it got cleaned out. So it's really simple. There's really a lot of ways you can move into the space of imagination. So you want to do a quick?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever you say. Yes.
Okay. So wherever you are in the world, you can just close your eyes. And the idea of seeing is not necessarily visual. You can see with your ears, you can see with your tongue, you can see with your skin. So just listen and then imagine, see what that sound might look like. And notice if it can move or shift. And if you can smell the sound, what kind of fragrance would it have? And then the most important part is to share. So you were doing it, Mia. What did you see?
Well, it's, oh, thanks. That was so cool. You're so cool. So what I saw, and I agree, we can hear without our ears and see without our eyes. What I actually saw was more of a feeling. I felt my shoulder joints kind of coming in, almost like a Rorschach image, kind of coming in like this. And then when you said, what do, I forget what you asked. Oh, how do we smell? I was smelling like sweet flowers, like geranium or gardenias, like that kind of really sweet, but kind of on the back of my head. So those were the two sensations. I didn't, visually it didn't happen for me. It was more visceral seeing, like some kind of energy moving in and then the smell back there. It was great.
Yeah. And so this idea of like imagination, people think it's for artists or it's for children, and that they're not visual people. They identify with not being visual people. And so the sense of imagining being more visceral, and then you were actually doing like things like this, and then you went like this. So then you can just take that and like move in your space like this. And then you can keep imagining and be like, well, what does this? What is this movement? And then you just keep like questioning and being curious about what comes next, rather than, again, oh, what was it before? What was the sound? I have to go back to the sound. You just continue with it. And that, I feel like it's a muscle for the future, to envision the future. Because if we keep getting stuck like, oh, what instrument? You didn't even ask me, like, what is it that you're playing? I could have, clapped my hands and done anything. There's so many ways to do it. And the fear around it is that it's not necessarily seen. It's not tangible. It's not in the quote unquote real world. But if you think about things like, past memories or trauma, or we can say that they're also not tangible, but we definitely feel them. So in the same way, and that's why sometimes it can get a little bit scary for people, is to move into that imagination, because then you can move into like old memories or, deep-rooted feelings or emotions that sometimes we can't get out of. And that's what makes it scary. So we need a little bit of the other way that's just for kids and it's not for adults, because we should be adulting and like, you know,
Adulting, right.
adulting.
Adulting.
Yeah.
That is, something you said, something so beautiful and actually practical, that we need imagination to see the future because the past is already back there. I think
We have
that's so
many ways
important.
of relating to the past. We don't have a lot of ways of relating to the future other than
Okay.
fear. You know, like, oh, I'm so scared of what is going to happen, rather than say, can I just spend 5 minutes a day imagining what, I mean, we do it naturally. We just don't call it imagination. We call
Is
it
that
like,
like daydreaming?
yeah, daydreaming, daydreaming, night dreaming, you know, just staring off into nature rather than being, you know, scrolling or doing all these things. Or if you see, like, if you're scrolling and you see something cool, you can just stop and be like, what does that taste like? Go through the senses. How does it move? Or you can take an inanimate object like this and just say, okay, what would it say? How would it move? Would it float? Would it drop? Would it swim? Would it do something that we can't even think about right now? I don't know. I mean, if you do this with kids, it's amazing what comes forward. So that's why the youth is kind of moving us into that future space.
That is so beautiful. That's true. The youth are moving us forward. I feel like people are getting more rigid especially during COVID and global warming, because we do need science. We need
Of
we
course.
need marks. We need demarcations to know progress, to mark progress, right? But I feel like the reliance on science, and people just rely into their left brain so much to make sense of what's happening. So I want to pause and give a shout out. We've got your fan club here. Mark says,
Yeah.
no sun, gray, metaphorical, mirrors the mood, plus lack of vitamin D. That's true. But also no sun, gray. We've got some of our old yoga friends, Amy and Mary,
Oh,
Amy Heater. I love
hey.
that point of imagination being the heartbeat of where we are now, because there's no going back. What other world can come forward? Thank you, Chanti. And of course, Mary Bruce giving a shout out. So it's nice that our friends are joining in and saying
Yeah.
hi.
Fun.
Cool. Fun. So we're I also feel like it's important to point out something else that you do that I think is remarkable, is the yantra work. We'll take a couple minutes to talk about that, if that's cool.
Sure.
So people may be familiar with a yantra and think that that's a mandala. So I think if you think of a mandala, people might picture this usually round object that has geometric shapes, repeating patterns in it, and it's colorful. A yantra is a little bit different, but kind of in the same universe. So can you explain to us what a yantra is?
Yeah, a yantra is a tool. I mean, in its basic element, it's a tool. So, you know, our bodies are yantras for our soul. And in the Hindu or East Indian tradition, these are, I like to think of them as portals or spaces to hold the energy that cannot be, that's difficult for us to see. You know, this is, again, going back to the language of the symbolic. So we have this energy of like Durga, you know, we're on the 4th day of Navaratri. And so this idea of Durga, like, how can we imagine, or how can we bring into our conscious field this massive energy of this great mother with all these weapons and all this power? And I like to think of a yantra as the symbolic form of the divine, where she is not necessarily anthropomorphized. She doesn't necessarily have a face or arms or tools and weapons or a tiger and a lion, but it's more of like a home or a space where that energy is codified. I think about it as when we're in like the womb, or when like the sperm and the egg come together, and you have this kind of separation of triangles and circles, and you know, that, what, I don't know what that's called, but anyway, you have these like shapes that create a space for eventually this baby to come out, or this child to come out. And then we're like, oh, it's Durga, or oh, it's Mia, because there's very specific things about it. And so each yantra also has very specific technology, we can call it. So the shapes that create the image. Maybe I can grab one here. Oh, Brihaspati. So here's I don't know if you can see that. This is actually Jupiter. It's a Thursday yantra. So those shapes and those images hold that energy. So then you can see or experience or worship or connect to something without necessarily a form, like a human form, a humanoid form. And I feel like, at least for me, most of my connection with the goddesses and the divine came through the space of yantra, and the process of actually making it. So it's a long, done it before, it's a long process of moving towards the bindu, which is the kind of the essence of the god or the goddess in the very middle. And if you remember, the very first thing that you do is you puncture the paper and you create or actually no, before that, you create 2 lines. And from those 2 simple lines, you have that bindu. But in order for us to have more of a connection to the image, we start to create and move from the inside out in a way. And then we go back as we meditate with the yantras, and we go from the outside in as you paint. And then when you actually sit with it and do tatrika, like eye gazing or gazing at the point, then you're actually moving from, you're only staring at the middle or looking at the middle or being communion with the bindu. And what happens, this is a great imagination practice too, like seeing, it's really good. You look at that bindu for time and time and time, and then you close your eyes, and what happens is that imprint of the yantra moves. I mean, it's magic. It moves into the space of, we can call it the internal, from the outside world, it moves inside. And when people can't imagine or they have trouble seeing like those kind of things, we do that practice because it gives you an idea of like, oh, wow, I can actually experience that inside. And kids think that's like, I took it to my husband's class one time, and they were all like looking at them, and they were like, wow, this is magic, and they were just amazed by it. Whereas adults are like, whoa, like, what was that? And then some people are also like, wow, it's amazing. Sometimes the technology of the yantra, and when you make it and you spend all that time and then you have that different relationship to it, it makes all the difference. But spend a little time with the divine to have that connection, or not. Sometimes it just comes, in different spaces.
That's so great. So, and I know the website I shared with your bio is yantrawisdom.com, correct? Yeah. So if you're interested in Chanti's work for yantra, log on to that. Is there any other place that you want people to get in touch with you with? If they're okay, no. So you can that's a hub for Chanti's amazing work. Thank you so much for taking the time to share so many interesting, fascinating things with us. It's so great. And thanks for friends that were watching, and thanks for you for watching and listening. These in response interviews are now becoming podcasts. And so you can look up In Response interviews with, or just In Response, and it should populate on any place you listen to podcasts, iPod or Spotify, all those places. They are on there. I said iPod. Do I mean Apple Tunes? Whatever. You all know what I mean. Out in the listening universe. So thanks so much for everyone. Thank you, Chanti. And until next time, take care. And by the way, I want to mention, if you want to support me and my team with the In Response series, become our patron at patreon.com/MiaPark. Okay, peace, everyone. See you, dear.